and welcome back to our channel. This episode we will be showing you how to dry a flower and embed it in our deep cast. There is a little bit of a process to this, so it will be something that we'll do in stages to show you, but we're going to start off by showing you how we actually dry the rose out. So let's get started and we'll tell you what we've got here. So in my tub here, I have what we call silica gel. Now this silica gel is pretty readily available online. Some high-end art stores may have it as well, but generally you sort of get a bulk lot of it. It is something that I find is probably one of the cheapest and easiest things to keep on hand if you do want to dry your organics. So it doesn't just have to be a rose, it can be leaves, it can be sticks, it can be insects, it can be anything that's organic that has a moisture content to it. And the point of it is to be able to position it and leave it in the silica gel until the moisture is removed and your object is dry. So aside from my silica gel, we do have a couple of roses that we'll be embedding today. And I have some scissors because I want to basically cut one of the rose's stems off. And with my particular container, I make sure I've got a lid on it. I do need to have an enclosed container. So it's just a container from your local store that I can ensure that I can seal and keep a lid on. I've also got some painter's tape and a marking pen because I do want to put the date on when I've actually embedded these, and I also want to mark where they are inside my silica gel. So we'll get to and show you how we do this. With the silica gel, it is something that you can reuse. Now, when you get your silica gel, it does depend on the brand, but you'll notice inside your gel itself are some larger indicator balls, again, depending on your particular brand. Now, they tend to change over time depending on the moisture content in your silica gel. So if you keep reusing your silica gel, you'll notice that instead of your indicator balls being maybe one paler colour, which in this particular case is like a paler orangey tan colour, they will start turning to an alternate colour. So here in this batch it turns to a deeper green. So that's when I know that my silica gel is starting to retain a fair bit of moisture. At the moment it's fine. I've still got a nice balance between what is my dry basically indicator balls and ones with moisture content. Now it can actually be reused. So you can, once you find that most of your indicator balls are changing colours, you can actually line this in a baking tray in your oven and keep it thin though, you don't want it too thick, and you should be able to bake it for approximately 45 minutes in a moderate oven. Again, it does depend on how much volume you have of your silica gel, but you will actually see your indicator balls turn back to the original colour. So that's just a handy little tip, so you don't have to throw your silica gel out after its use, you can continue to use it. So that's another reason I like using silica gel to actually dry my organics. So I plan on drying my roses in two different ways. So with this particular one here, I want to try retain my leaves, and I want to lay it down in my silica gel. So it'll be really important when I start to put it in here to ensure that I have my leaf position and my petal position exactly where I want it. Because as it's drying, those positions of the leaves and the petals will be in the position that will come out when it's dry. You won't be able to then move and manipulate petals and leaves and things like that when it's dry, because they become quite brittle when it's dry, and if you are trying to move and manipulate shape, they generally break. So it's important at this stage to make sure you get your positioning right in your silica gel. So this one we're going to leave as is. I will trim the stem a little bit shorter. But this guy here, because we don't have any leaves on it and it's a flatter rose type, instead of leaving the stem on it, I'm going to cut it right at the base here, which means when I dry it, I'll be sitting it upright and I'll be embedding it upright like this eventually in our deep cast resin as well. So I'm going to get to and cut this one. I am going to cut it right at the base as much as I can get right close. I'm going to support the petals and cut it right close to the base. The closer I cut it to the base, the better advantage I have of embedding it flat later on. If it has too much of a point, then you're going to have your rose sort of roll around a little bit. And also by cutting it flatter and closer to the base here, it enables us to get obviously it closer to the silica gel and enable it to dry a little bit quicker. Okay, I'm happy with that. We lost one petal, which is fine, but basically this is going to be the position I'm going to be putting it in my silica gel. So I'm now going to just trim my stem on this particular rose. And I know most of my molds aren't very big, so what I'll do is I'll trim it so it'll fit in my container, but then I may trim it down a little bit further depending on my mold shape when I'm ready to embed it in deep cast. So now we get on to popping them in our silica gel. Now it's always important to make sure you've got a nice even coverage around the entire organic item, whether it's flower, leaves, whatever it might be. So what I try to do is I try to start with an area where I can still have about 1 centimetre coverage of my silica gel in the bottom of my container. So I'm just moving the bulk of it out of the way. And we will start with our single rose without the stem. Now I want to make sure all the base of the greenery here is up against the petals. So I'm going to sit it flat into my container here in the silica gel, making sure that I do have a little bit of an area around the actual flower itself, so I can then support it by moving some of the silica gel under the bottom portion of the petals. Because if I don't and I just dump a heap of silica gel on top, it's just going to flatten all my petals out completely. So as you are adding silica gel onto it, you also want to support underneath it. So I'm just going to lift up this side here and then just fill some silica gel in there. And the same goes for here. Just going to lift up and push my silica gel in around underneath it. So I'm happy that that's supported. This rose is quite open already. The petals are actually quite open. So my aim is to basically gently pop some of the silica gel in between all the petals. So that way they stay in position. And I'm not squashing any petals to one side. I'm keeping it looking quite even. You can sort of move your petals, hold them, and then fill your silica gel in around it, making sure that it is supported. Because once again, this position that I'm putting it in now is how it's going to come out when it's dry. By putting the silica gel in around all these petals too, it does help dry it out a little bit faster. Another thing to note is when you are embedding any organics into your silica gel to dry, it is best to try obtain them as fresh as possible, because that way they haven't started the decomposition process. You'll find that if you have a fresh flower that you immediately embed it into silica gel versus a flower that you've had sitting in your vase for a week, you'll notice that when you put it in the silica gel and you bring it back out, there's a chance that you'll have a lot of petal loss, or it might break down a little bit more and won't be as structurally sound. And this does vary depending on rose or what the organic matter is. There's some flowers that are very, very delicate that you have to be careful of. A rose is a reasonably sturdy flower to embed in silica gel. Now I'm going to just gently cover the rose. And the aim is, again, like I said before, making sure you've got a good sort of centimetre coverage around the entire flower. So that means on top as well. Now, I'm not going to 100% completely cover it just yet because I know I'm going to move my silica gel around again to put this rose in. So I'm just going to flip my container around and I'm going to embed my stemmed rose with my leaves in the opposite direction. Okay, so once again, I'm laying this one down. So I will move some of my silica gel around. And I want to make sure my leaf position is exactly where I want it when it comes out, when it's dry. So I'm going to sit them all upwards towards the rose bud itself. And I'm going to start to dig, but then I'm going to gently put some on top of the first leaf, making sure my additional leaves are relatively flat. I actually don't want them protruding too far out of the actual bud itself because of the shape of the mold that I'll end up embedding it in. Just going to push that stem down a little bit further. And I've just kept going until it's covered. Now, being that my rose is on the side now, it is a little bit difficult to get into, but I am going to attempt to get my gel inside here in amongst all these leaves. It is petals, sorry, not leaves. It is a pretty tight bud, but I'll do my best in pushing around and supporting around the petals. But I don't want it to open up too much either, so I'm happy that it's a slightly tighter bud. We've got our wide open bud that we've just popped in the other end. So I'm making sure it's coming up inside here as well. I'm just getting too much in between those outer petals, so I'm just going to push some back out and put them together again. And I may even try remove some from the bottom just a little bit to get it a bit deeper. Make its way down gently. Now I've got a little bit of clear plastic here that just come out of some packaging. I'm actually going to cut a little bit off of it and use it as a divider to keep it in against the side here, so we can keep this side of the silica gel covering the side of the rose instead of it falling back down. So I'm just going to cut that out just below the height of the box, so that way we can still ensure that our lid will go on. Okay. We've basically got our both roses in position. So I know I've got my open bud down the bottom corner here, and we've got our stem here with the top end of the rosebud up the top here. At this point, I want to actually put my container lid on, and I want to mark my container lid from the top and the bottom in case we open this to check on them. I want to make sure everything goes back in the right way. So I always do this when I'm embedding anything. I'm putting a little bit of tape on the bottom side of the container and the top side of the container. I am literally drawing a little arrow so I know these are my matching points. And the reason I want to do this is because I want to write my positioning. So I know I have my wide rosebud here, so I'm going to write that here. And I know I have my stem and rosebud in this position. I'm just going to write stem with a little arrow and then rosebud here. Now the reason I like to do this is because drying your organics can vary in time frame. It does depend on the size of your object. It depends on, like this particular rose is a very tight rosebud, so it can take a lot longer because the silica gel hasn't gone down into between each of the petals. So time frame wise, you can be looking at anywhere between sort of 2 weeks up to a month, maybe even 6 weeks to ensure that these are dried correctly. You don't want to bring them out and have moisture content still in them, because any form of moisture content that you're going to embed in resin is going to still want to decompose, which means you end up with like a bubble around your item. Once it's embedded, it can start basically creating a lot of moisture if there's and decomposition, which means it starts to look like it's rotting a little bit. And if you've got extreme moisture and it's a larger object, though, that moisture and that decomposition that's happening can create gases, and that actually can potentially crack your resin as well. So it is essential to make sure they are thoroughly dry. So I may at times reopen this, know where they are, which means I can then gently try to scoop under and remove them gently. See how brittle the petals feel, see if coloration. Generally you can feel by texture and looking at them how dry they are, and you can generally feel that they've got a little bit of moisture in them still. So if they do, put them back in again and just keep on an eye on them that way. What I also like to do is pop the date on them too, so I know how long they've been in there, because sometimes you forget, you get busy with life and you go, okay, has it been a week or two, or are we sitting at like a couple of months now? So I also put the date on them. So, and then I will keep them aside safely where I know they're not going to be moved, and I will check on them usually at that sort of 2-week mark. So that's how I dry my organics. See you in 2 weeks.